my next watercolor video. In this video, we're going to be looking at brushes and brushwork. And basically, I've titled this video, Getting the Most Out of Your Brushes, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to create brush marks with just 2 brushes. We're going to be looking at the flat brush and the round brush. Now, I know I have, as you can see on my table over here, a lot of watercolor brushes. Quite a few actually. You can see I've got a lot of different types of mop brushes, I've got a fan brush, I've got all these things called a fidget scrubber, all these type of things. But the reason why I don't want to go to all of these different brushes is because I very, very rarely use them. I have bought them over the time I've been painting, and a lot of them just sit in my little brush holder and I hardly ever use them. The ones I do use all the time is my flat brush and my round brush. And so you can get so much out of these 2 brushes. You can do so many brush strokes. You'll be absolutely amazed. I was actually amazed when I started learning how to paint, because I was very overwhelmed when I went to an art store. There were so many different types of brushes. I didn't know what to buy, and as you can see, I bought quite a lot. And afterwards, I found that I hardly ever use them, and I'm just using mostly these 2 brushes. So what a great thing, right? You do not need to buy that many brushes, you just need to buy a couple of brushes, particularly when you're first starting out, and then over time you get to learn which brushes you prefer. So without further ado, let's go and have a look at how we create those lovely brush marks with just 2 brushes. Right. See you in the video. As I explained in my intro, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at how to make different brush strokes with just 2 brushes, a round brush and a flat brush. Now don't get confused with the round brush, particularly between a round brush and a mop brush. A mop brush is a very different brush, so we're not using the mop brush, we're using a round brush. Now the thing with a round brush is that it's a very, very versatile brush because it has this lovely fat, it's like a section near the ferrule, like lots and lots of brush strokes, but it also comes to a lovely fine point. So you want a brush that does come to a lovely fine point and also holds a lot of water. Now I have another brush here which is a size 6, so it's about half the size of this one, so I think this is a size 12. And this brush, as you can see, it's not coming to a fine point. It is actually really quite stubby. It kind of has a flat point. I mean, I can shape it as much as I possibly can, but it's not coming to a fine point. The reason why this is not coming to a fine point is because it's a lot older. I've used it quite a lot and it has become worn, and so therefore it's no longer useful for doing some of the brush strokes that we're going to be doing. So kind of when you're doing these things, make sure you do get a lovely brush that comes to a lovely fine point. And the other thing I thought I should mention just before we go and start doing the brush strokes is the round brush comes in different sizes. So this is a 3, a 6, and this one here is a 12, and they continue going up quite a lot. So as you can see on this piece of paper, this is just the back of an old painting. I've been playing around with my brush strokes, and I only have used these 2 brushes, the flat brush and the lovely round brush, not the thin one. I used this really big thick one, and I want to show you how I did those brushes, and how I did those brush strokes, and what you need to look out for, how to create them, and how to control them. And you can get a whole bunch of different variety of brush strokes just with 2 brushes. You don't need a whole bunch of things. So let's go and have a look at how we did that. Alright, so the very first thing you want to do is you want to load up your round brush. I'm going to put my flat brush away. I'm going to load up my round brush. So I'm going to load it up with a lot of colour. I'm going to load it up particularly quite a lot of colour for you guys so you can see it. And I'm going to try and hold my brush in a way, it might be a little bit different than what I normally would do because of the angle of the camera, and so that you can actually see what I'm doing. So what you're going to do is you're going to load up your round brush, and you're going to, my palette's on an angle, and that's why the pigment is flowing down, but yours is going to be flat, and so therefore you don't need, you won't see this sort of reaction that's happening on the screen. But what you want to do is you want to put your brush into the water, into the actual pigment, sorry, not water, and as you're pulling it away from your puddle, you're going to twist it slightly, and as you twist it, you're actually creating that lovely fine point. Now if I didn't twist it, say I just did this and pulled it out, see how my brush isn't at a fine point, it's all over the place. If I do it worse, it's even worse. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a lovely thin point at the end of your brush with which you're going to create your lovely fine controlled line. So when we hold our brush, we can hold it, when I'm painting oils, I'll always hold it at the end of my brush because I want to use my big arm muscles, but you can also hold close down here, especially when you're doing fine detailed work. Now we're going to hold our brush and it's going to be perpendicular to our paper. Now I'm not 100% sure if this is going to be quite visible and understandable on the screen, only because of the camera angle, but the brush is actually at a perpendicular to my piece of paper. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly caress my brush and move it across. Now I can, if I want to have more stability, I can use this little pinky here and I can anchor it onto my piece of paper and I can move my fingers this way, or I can use my whole entire arm. Totally up to you. Try the different things. So again, I'm going to load my brush up and I'm going to create a lovely fine line. So just draw the line across my piece of paper, and I can draw down my piece of paper. I can continue doing different things, or I can not have my finger there and I can just stroke my brush down, and by trying to control the pressure I have on my brush, I can create very lovely thin fine lines with a very, very thick brush. And I can do a lot of that because there's so much water in here. I can continue making these lines until the actual pigment runs out. Whereas if I used, say for example, a smaller brush like this, I would have to be continually dipping into my paint and to create those lines. Whereas with just this bigger thick brush, I can still create very, very thin controlled lines without having to consistently go back to my palette. Now the other thing that I wanted to show you, so I've created those lovely thin lines with that lovely thin point on my brush. I want to show you what happens with that brush, the other brush I showed you before, that doesn't come into a fine point. So it doesn't matter how much I twist it, it just doesn't want to come to a fine point. And I can try and create a lovely thin line with it, but it's not as thin as some of these ones because of that thickness of it. At the end, it doesn't do too bad a job, but as your brush gets older and older, you are going to lose that point on your brush, and so you kind of want to be replacing your round brush when it doesn't come to a point anymore. You can still use this brush. I use this brush all the time, this brush here all the time, because I can do other things with it. So it's not something that you're going to throw away and go, oh, this is totally useless anymore. You can still use it. But just remember that if you want to create lovely thin lines, you are going to want to have a nice thin point on the end of your brush. So the next brush stroke we're going to be creating is the variegated, variegated with width, the width of the line. So again, we're going to get pigment onto our brush. We're going to twist it because we still want that fine point at the end, and what we're going to do is we're going to do the same. We're going to hold it perpendicular to the paper, and we're going to alter the pressure that we put on the brush, and we're going to push this section of the brush down towards the paper to create a thicker line. So I'm going to start thin, and then I'm going to push down, and I'm going to lift up, and I twist slightly at the end. I'm twisting slightly at the end to create that lovely thin end as well. I hope that was quite easy to see. I might just change my angle of my hand just to show you what I'm doing, because it might have been a little bit difficult to see what I was doing. I'm not 100% sure. I can't see what the video looks like. But okay, so if I'm starting thin and then I'm pushing down. Can you see how I'm pushing down with my brush? And then I'm lifting up and I'm twisting it to create that brush stroke, that thinner end. And as you can see, these look like leaves, and they're done with a single brush stroke. How fantastic that! I mean, I could then grab more color into like a different color. I'm just going to get some of that color off. I'm going to grab some blue. I'll load my brush up with blue. I'm going to get that in the end. I'm going to dab off the tip of it. I'm going to pick up some of that brown. Now I've got two different colours in my brush, and I can now create a brush stroke that has variegation in it. So the last thing we just did was that lovely variegated brush stroke within a varied width brush stroke. And the reason why I'm getting you to understand what you can do with your brushes is because the more you understand how to play around with your brushes and the brush strokes that you can create, you're going to be less timid when you go to paint. Because some people, I know that some people will create, just as an example, create brush strokes, and they will do multiple brush strokes to get the one stroke. So in order for them to do this kind of stroke, what they'll do is they'll come in and they'll do a little bit, and then they'll get back into here, and then they'll do a little bit more of this, and they kind of dab around, and you know, then they'll create the last bit there. While this brush stroke gives you, like that sort of dabbing mechanism, gives you the actual same shape, it doesn't have the same confidence that you see when you have these other brush strokes. And this is another reason why you kind of want to understand what you can do with your brush and get confident with your mark making your brush strokes, because just doing a simple brush stroke with a lot of confidence is a lot better than doing a whole bunch of little strokes. And it kind of, you start to see it more and more when you get into more complex compositions and things like that. But in a little thing like this, it doesn't seem quite important. But the more you understand how to make brush strokes, the better your work is going to be. And the more confidence you have, it doesn't matter if you put that brush stroke, say for example, I'm putting this brush stroke in a composition with a whole bunch of flowers, like as a leaf. It doesn't matter if I accidentally put it in just slightly the wrong place, because the confidence of that brush stroke helps it work within the actual composition. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, let's move on, and let's now look at the next brush stroke. So what we're going to be looking at is, again, we're going to fill our brush with some pigment. I'm going to put in a lot more pigment than what I normally would do, just because I need it to show up on my piece of paper. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to roll my brush. Actually, I don't need to roll my brush to get it out, but it's a good thing to practice, just practicing that rolling so you get that lovely fine end. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the ferrule, the length of the actual brush, and we're going to do a sideward stroke, and we're going to create this thing over here, this broken brush stroke. So what we do is we put our brush down and we sort of slant it closer to the paper, so the brush is coming more sort of parallel to the paper, and I'm going to run my brush across. Now the more paint I have in my brush, the wetter that brush stroke is going to be. The less paint is going to be a little bit more jagged. I'll show you what I mean. So if I've got a lot of brush water in here, and if I put that on, I can still get that variegated look. But if it's too wet, so if I put a lot of water in, say for example I put some more water into this, just so you can see, and I do the same thing, a lot of water, and I just brush it on, it has a different feel. See, this one here has a nice broken feel to it, whereas this one doesn't. And you get to learn that by understanding how much pigment I need to put into my pool of water to create the kind of brush stroke that I want. So more pigment is going to be less water in my brush, and I can pull the water off by putting a little bit of a thirsty piece of paper under it, and that will pull some of that pigment out. And then when I go to make the brush stroke, I'm not having as much water into that. So this is how I do a lovely a sidewards drag to create an interesting feel. And I could, these could be pavements, they could be a whole bunch of different things. It's just totally up to you. The next thing you can do is then you can go, same like we did with this brush over here, we can pick up a different pigment. Let's get some blue and put it in down here, and you can sort of mix it into the above pigment so that it bleeds into it. Or you can just like have it underneath it, totally up to you. But you can kind of see I can get this nice sort of varied look to my sideward brush stroke just by using different pigments. So I just encourage you just to play with this, just see what you can do. And as I said, this looks like a lovely a wall, like one of those brick walls that you see particularly in olden days and all that sort of stuff. And older days, I mean like old buildings and all that sort of stuff. So lovely brick wall. It could also be one of those lovely brick paths, all that sort of stuff. But that's just by doing that with this brush. So the next thing you can do with this brush, same brush, this brush is so versatile, it's amazing. You can then go and decide that I'm going to do the stab. Now the stab is just basically, again, loading up your little brush with some pigment, and you're going to basically jam your paintbrush down towards your piece of paper, and then you're going to twist it as you pull up. So, and then twist it to create an interesting brush stroke. Now this, I'm going to actually put some more pigment in here, and I can really jam it in and puff it up, and I'm getting an interesting shapes. And this can be foliage, it can be little chickens, it can be a whole bunch of different things, but you can kind of see that you can create really interesting shapes just by moving your brush around and just sort of letting the brush just do interesting different things when you just stab it. That's called the stab. The last thing you can do, I mean, not the last, there's a whole bunch of things you can do with this brush, but this is, in this instance, we're just going to do this. The next one is just a splatter. So you're going to fill your brush up with a whole bunch of pigment, and you're going to put your finger there, and you're just going to tap, and you get splatters all over your piece of paper. I hope you can see that, because this is a really lovely thing. You can do that with just water. Unfortunately, my water is a little bit dirty. Oops, lost my brush. My water is dirty, but you can use it. You can say, for example, if I had a section of pigment on my, just put some pigment down, I can then, into that pigment, I can splatter different colours using that same technique. See? Or I can do water, I can add some water into it, so I can splatter some water into it, and it will create different effects. You can get those lovely cauliflowers. Some people don't like cauliflowers. I don't mind them, particularly if I'm trying to create a particular thing. Obviously, if I wait a little bit longer for that paint to dry, the water would have a different feel to it. I might just leave it for a little bit, and I'll show you that later on. So as I said, I can add water into this pool of paint now. Now at the moment it has a sheen to it, so if I add water to it while it has a sheen to it, it's not going to work. So I just need to wait just a little bit for that sheen. And the way I can tell if it's a sheen, I tilt my head just slightly to the side and I have a look at it, and I can see that there's a lovely sheen on the surface of the paper. And so therefore, if I add more things into it, it'll run beautifully through it. But if I want to have create pigment that sort of, or water that marks in it that actually are marks, I have to wait just a little bit for that sheen to come off, and then I can add the water to it. So let's try it now. Still think it's a little bit too early. But let's have a look. Worked fantastically, specifically up here. As you can see, I've got a lovely watermark being created here. This section of my actual pool was a little bit damper. I could tell because there was a sheen down here and not a sheen here, but you can kind of see how this section here is blended in quite a lot, and the pigment's moved around, whereas this one here, the watermark is sitting within the pigment and it's pushing it out because the paper was sort of more damp than wet. Okay. That's one of the fun things you can do. I really encourage you to practice and play around with your lovely round brush. You can do a whole bunch of different things, and especially you can make some amazing little marks with it. So moving on, let's now look at our lovely flat brush. Now the flat brush has is quite versatile as well as the round. It's not as versatile, it is, but it isn't as versatile as the round brush. And we can still make variegated brush strokes with this. I'm going to wet my brush, I'm going to pick up some pigment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a varied width brush mark, similar to this, but with the flat brush. And I'm going to be using the width of my brush as well as the tip of my brush to make those thin marks. So let's go. So I'm going to start with a very thin mark, and I'm going to drag the thin, like have the brush sit and just make a mark, and then I'm going to move it down and flatten my brush out and push it down towards the surface of the paper. And then as I'm coming to finally lift it off again, I'm going to twist it slightly and get that thin mark. See how easy that was? Let's try it again, just to have a little bit of fun. Again, just so you know what I'm doing, I'm coming down slightly, pushing my brush, and then I'm twisting at the end to create an interesting brush mark. I can then try something different. I can go, this time I'm going to go away from me. This way I was pulling the brush towards me. Next time I'm going to pull away from me, and I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to load up my brush. I'm going to start with that lovely thin thing. I'm going to push it down, move it away from me, and flip up and see what I can do. So just this brush, I can create some amazing different little marks. I mean, they look different to this, but they still have a similarity to it. And so if you understand how to use this brush, you can create some amazing different marks to the normal round brush mark. Okay. The final one, just with this brush, I mean, this brush, you can do quite a lot of different things. I can really make that width there really thick and really thin, as you can see. But I can also use this brush to move pigment around in large surfaces like this, and I'm just altering how the brush moves across the surface. So crosses this way, come down this way. I'm using the whole portion of the brush and just moving it around just to create just that interesting marks. And I can cover a large surface very quickly with this brush. That's the other thing that you can do with your lovely flat brush. There are other things, but in this video, that's basically the gist of what I'm getting across at. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use all of these little brush marks that we've just made, and we're going to create a lovely little painting. So there you go. 2 brushes, a whole bunch of different types of brush strokes, whole different type of marks you can make. And it's just amazing how versatile those 2 brushes are. And once you start understanding that, you can start to see, when you look at other people's paintings, the types of brushes that they used and how confident they were when they used them. And hopefully this has opened your eyes up to the actual brush marks. Brush marks and learning how to use your brushes is really key when you're learning how to paint, because it's an extension of your arm. It's a little bit different to drawing. You're actually learning how to wield a utensil, like a brush, to create brush marks. When I first started doing it, I was learning Japanese painting, and we just had the ink and brushes, and I had to learn how to create a whole bunch of different marks using just a couple of brushes and ink, and it was just amazing. It really helped my brush marks when I actually went to paint in other mediums, so in oils and as well as watercolor. So I highly recommend that you play around with your brushes, work out what kind of brush marks you can make, because if you can master brush marks like this, when you go to paint a painting, it's there. It's part of your language, part of your psyche, it's part of you, and you'll be able to paint amazing little paintings. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use all of these little different brush marks and create an actual painting. So hopefully see you in that little video. Otherwise, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye!